So, welcome. I'm here today with my good friend, American Esoteric. How are you doing, brother?
Doing well. I'm ready to have some fun. Have some fun here tonight.
Excellent. Well, I'm on Epstein Island, so I'm rearing to have some fun with my "Make Alchemy Great Again" hat. Link in description.
Indeed.
Buy the merch. And so we've got a little interesting thing today. Because everyone wants to know who's the best occultist. So we're gonna find out who the best occultist is. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and it's not, it's all in good fun, because no matter who you got on this, no matter who we sat in these chairs, everyone's going to have their own little agreements and disagreements. So I'm sure you could run this simulation many times and get different outcomes. It ought to be interesting.
Definitely different starting positions, different outcomes. Well, maybe we'll do this again with some other faces. Drop a comment down below to see who should have been on the list and who shouldn't. But maybe we'll just start it up. We'll bring up the list and we'll go through who's there. So here's the tournament bracket that we got. So on the left side, we have Eliphas Levi, Franz or Eliphas or Eliphas Levi. I've heard some people pronounce it differently, or like a combination, like Eliphas Levi or Eliphas Levi.
Right.
Whatever. Either or. The French occultist, Old Guard, Magic Man, and then below him we have Franz Baden, the Czech hermeticist himself, the ultra giga Chad hermeticist. Everyone knows about Franz Baden. It's a bit debatable. People some like Golden Dawn guys prefer Golden Dawn, and some hermetic Baden guys prefer Baden's work, but he's quite well known. He's quite well known, quite well respected. Then below him, we have Blavatsky, the Madame.
Yes.
And she has a little controversial history, but we'll go through these people as we settle on them. After Blavatsky, we have Gurdjieff, the man of mystery himself. Under him, Steiner, Rudolf Steiner. Then Aleister Crowley, the beast himself. And finally, the bottom two on the left side, we have Manly P. Hall and Albert Pike.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting list. This is an interesting list because these are more modern guys on the left. They're the more moderns on the left, and on the right, we have people who are more classical or Renaissance classical. Because at the top we have Giordano Bruno, Art of Memory. He died for he died for the Hermetic science, shall we put it like that. And under him, another man whose life was dedicated to the Hermetic science, Paracelsus. What's his name? The man, the myth, the legend, Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. I believe that's the full name.
Well done.
And beneath Paracelsus, another man with another myth, Agrippa, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, our favorite German theologian, soldier, alchemist, and magician, who wrote the tomes, 3 books of occult philosophy. And he's up against Iamblichus. Is Iamblichus a Syrian or Chaldean? What do they call him?
Yeah. He was a Syrian from Chalcis. So I think he's considered a Syrian. But and his parents were like, their history went back in the area for a while, and the city was sort of like I don't know if it was a trading post, but a lot of people from around like the Eastern Mediterranean were coming through there, and from the Middle East. So there was like a lot of ideas circulating through his home city, and I'm sure that had an effect on him as well.
100%. It's always where there's like this mix, this cosmopolitan mix, that you get some very interesting people arising.
Yes.
And now the final brackets is Hermes Trismegistus versus Pythagoras, which will be interesting. and of course, and maybe we'll leave that till last, the final one, Zoroaster versus Jesus Christ. That's right, everyone. Jesus Christ is an occultist.
You can't perform that many miracles without something going on there.
So we'll probably dive deep into them when we get to them. But I think we'll start on the left side. We'll definitely start on the left side. And I don't know, how much do you know about the first bracket here? Eliphas Levi versus Franz Barden. How much do you know about these guys?
More about Levy than Barden. Almost nothing about Barden. I read Levy's history of magic, a little bit of his transcendental magic. I just went back in today and like read his invocation of Apollonius of Tyana and that little interesting piece, because it seems like that kind of stuff with him, that seems to have an influence on French Spiritism with like Allan Kardec and everything. Clearly he influenced the Golden Dawn and so forth. So he's got a major influence. You're going to have to educate me on Barden though.
Yeah, no, of course. With Barden, it's interesting. So Barden, the reason why we know about him is because, so there was in the Czech or Czechoslovakia back then, there was apparently in Prague, there was a circle of initiates. And apparently Franz Barden wasn't even the biggest guy there, but it was like a circle of initiates. And one was an astrologer, one was an alchemist, one did. And they all kind of came together. And Prague has this whole esoteric scene to it, but none of them published their works kind of outside of the Czech language, whereas Barden was the only one who published his works in German. And so because there were these German works, it's a shorter skip to go from German to English than it is to go from Czech to English. So because he was known in the German scene, and the German Rosicrucian and magic scene, it did actually have quite a lot of links with the English scene. Like the English scene, you have all of these English guys coming to the continent, like Bulwer Lytton, and vice versa. There's always this flow, like Andrew Mackenzie, the Rosicrucian guy who predates the Golden Dawn, who was kind of friends with Westcott. He came to the continent and came back. There are all of these, there's all this flow from Germany to England. So the fact that we got Franz Barden stuff is kind of a miracle. Like, thank you, Franz Barden, for writing your books in German, basically, or having German translations nonetheless. But he's interesting because he's one of those guys who was like, I've been commanded by the White Lodge to unveil the first 5 tarot cards, it was said. So his book, Initiation into Hermetics, is supposed to be a complete unveiling of the first tarot card, the Magician Tarot card. And fundamentally what it is, as the other guys have said this before, and I concur, it's basically Raja Yoga, but in a Western, really well spun in a for the Western mind to kind of collect and correlate. So Franz Barden knew a lot of Eastern stuff, or for his time, he drew from a lot of really like solid Eastern sources, and he kind of made a system of Raja Yoga, but combined it with some Rosicrucian stuff, some stuff from Pascal Beverly Randolph.
Is it true that he survived, what was it, Nazi prison camp, or he survived the Holocaust, and then afterwards he wrote his 3 most famous books?
So what I heard,
concentration camp rather.
Yeah. So what I heard is, so I mentioned that he was meant to unveil the first 5. So he wrote 3 books and then died. So he never completed the 4th and never wrote the 5th one. So we have the second book. What is it? The one on kind of high magic, ceremonial magic. That was to unveil the priestess card, which a lot of people criticize, and it's not that good. But the third book was supposed to be True Kabbalah, which is interesting. It's more about, it's a letter magic, so it is somewhat Kabbalistic, and I'm going through that on my channel for my members. We do a monthly reading of it, going through with some commentary. But yeah, so that book was then the 3rd tarot card, the Empress. So the Emperor, and so he got, he was writing these books to unveil, quote unquote, or make this system that he could give to people. And the whole idea behind this was, you didn't need to necessarily find or have a teacher. He genuinely wanted to create an initiatic system that you could get just from a book, which is a big call and very debatable. But he got to the 3rd book, and then World War II happened. He got, all occultists basically got thrown into concentration camps. So even the OTO at the time was run by a guy called Karl Germer, who was also a member of the Fraternity of Saturn. Karl Germer got thrown into a camp as well. And I believe that's where, this is like some OTO lore, Karl Germer did his like holy guardian angel ritual in a concentration camp. He was just like, well, I'm here now, and just locked in and sat in a corner and just did magic for like his time there. But so Franz Barden survived the concentration camps, but he's Eastern European. So when he got liberated, he didn't get liberated by the Americans, he got liberated by the communists. And the communists were like, oh, you're an occultist? This is bourgeoisie superstition. into a jail cell. And
Gosh.
then there's conflicting reports. It's either he dies mysteriously, or there's one source where it's like, apparently, and this is the thing, I mentioned this in another video, you can kind of, not from this photo, but you can see some other photos. Bud's a bit of a chunky boy. And apparently he had liver problems, and he like ate a bacon sandwich and his liver exploded and he died. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. So he either died from eating a bacon sandwich, or he died mysteriously in a communist police cell. Like those are the two, you know, which way Western man that you can choose to end your story with your headcanon. But Franz Barden is remembered for that kind of stuff. So he's very well regarded as a modern author who's highly practical as well. Like, when I find a lot of people, when they want to learn, they don't want to go through theory, and you kind of do need to go through some theory, some philosophy. But if you're going to do practice, Franz Barden's books are chock-a-block with practice, specifically Initiation to Hermetics. So I feel I always recommend that to people, to just be like, here's a system, boom, done.
Would you say that Eliphas's writings, because he makes a lot of historical references, is doing a lot of comparison. You know, I mean, he was saying that the occult sciences were universal, and that like they left the magical occultists of the ancient world left their sort of detritus on all the different ruins of the ancient world. So he was Franz Barden making as many like historical callbacks and comparisons, or was he more on this practice?
No, so he was more practical, and in fact, he obscures his sources. So when you read his like ceremonial magic book, apparently he like takes all of his like spiritual beings, he just takes from random places. Like there are some which are from the Abramelin book, some that are from Mansions of the Moon, some that are from here and there. And like, even, you know how I said on Initiation into Hermetics is like just pure Raja Yoga, at least in the first part. That's not something he says. That's just what, like, people who read it and kind of try to find his sources and work out what sources he kind of used to make this. He's just kind of, he doesn't footnote anything. He's just like, yeah, trust me,
yeah,
right. So he doesn't go into that. Whereas, and this is why, I don't know, Eliphas Levi is kind of good, because I've only read Transcendental Magic, and in that he's got very good ceremonial magic. And I've actually read no, that's actually a lie. His story of summoning Apollonius of Tyana, do you know Blavatsky did commentary for that? And it's like an essay somewhere.
Interesting. I know that she name drops him a bunch. I didn't know she did some commentary there. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, and so she has a take, because the whole thing that people talk about with Levi is he has a bunch of blinds in his work. And Blavatsky basically says a lot of the setup for the Apollonius ritual is there for a stumbling block. It's just like, you know, it's too elaborate to actually be real, but then the main experience is kind of real, and you can definitely derive a lot of like philosophy also from it, and certain things about that. And I'm like, oh, interesting. It's been a while actually since I've read it, but yeah.
Well, in that little piece, he does kind of, and this is where I see some influence on Allan Kardec potentially. There is, he's like, I'm not saying I actually brought the soul of Apollonius of Tyana down here, and you know, because he does this 3 different times, and he says that it happened 3 different times, and it was so similar that he doesn't even describe the next 2 times it happens. But so he doesn't actually suggest that this is Apollonius himself, you know, which is interesting, because later spiritists would also make that kind of like, you know, yeah, we're going to bring in, like Flammarion would bring in Galileo, and then something would come in and talk, you know, the table would start talking and give this astronomical knowledge. But in the end, he's like, yeah, I don't actually think this is Galileo. It's just, that's kind of our permission slip to access some astronomical information. So I kind of like that. There's a little bit of skepticism in there, but he's not denying that the experience happened, and that, you know, that the invocation and that the ritual actually worked to bring it in. So yeah, interesting bits there.
And he's still, like, in Transcendental Magic, there's, in the practical section, there's still invocations that are still used in modern orders. The Conjuration of the 4 and the Conjuration of the 7 are still used. I mean, most people go pure Golden Dawn nowadays in the West, but there are a lot of people who still use Eliphas Levi stuff. And of course, lest we forget the art. Eliphas Levi's Baphomet. How influential is that?
Right. Yeah, a lot of people think that they look at the image Baphomet that you see nowadays, and you're thinking, oh, this is what the Knights Templar were talking about, and it's no, that came with Elvis Levy.
All of that is Levy's mastery of symbolism, and I'm not sure if have you seen Levy's pentagram?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely have. You just didn't know it was a Levy or something like that. But
I'm sure
that one's just it's filled with symbols, and when you look at it, you're like, damn, it's so good. He's like master of symbolism there. So I don't know. So what are you feeling? What are you feeling?
I say, well, you seem to have more information on this one, but if we stuck with, say, influence, probably Levy would win, right?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong there?
No, I think you're right. Right, because Franz Baden was kind of known, but it's not like he had. There's like the Badenites even today. It's a circle of people who are very enthusiastic about it, but he has had nowhere near the amount of influence that Levy had. Levy was also like the first guy to kind of do the science thing, be like electricity and magnetism. This is magic and things like that. And like that influenced later people like Baden. So when Baden talks about electric and magnetic fluids, that's kind of Levy as well. So yeah, I'm just wary of like, if we do this like that, then it's always going to be the oldest guy, and then Jesus or Zoroaster, Jesus is just going to win or something.
No, it's just one. Maybe we just use influence as one layer. You know, I'm always a nerd for the footnotes, for the guys dropping their sources down there. That's because that helps me out. I like to track them all down.
Yeah, so this is tough because like I think Levy definitely for the influence, but Baden is just so practical, and he's such a good. It's good to like give people. I'm thinking with this, because Levy does have some practice, I'm just gonna and Franz Baden, he did suffer. This is tough, but maybe I think I will put Levy forward. I'm gonna put Levy forward and have him win.
Nice. I vote Levy as well, because just because I'm biased and I know a little bit more about him, and I like that he actually was willing to tell you about some of his experiences, which some people never do that. Some people are cool with doing that. So I like knowing at least that some of these people aren't just whistling Dixie. Things are actually happening.
Real. And now for the next one. We have Blavatsky versus Gurdjieff. So you probably know more about Blavatsky, and I probably know more about Gurdjieff. So
yeah, I think that's how it's all. Yes.
You want to talk about the Madame?
She is just like a giant comet from the heavens that's she is gonna make a splash wherever she lands. And I mean, her secret doctrine in and of itself, if that fell from the sky and hit the ground, you would hear it vibrate from miles away. I mean, the thing is big, boys and girls. It's a big boy, and you will get insights upon insights the more you open it up. But like the secret doctrine, man, it's just so exhaustive. She's footnoting and referencing every little teeny little thing. I mean, half of the book is almost just her footnotes and side notes and her sort of commentaries, right? It's which contain little gems. Now, did she bring out some false information, this and that? Like, because when she brings up a fact of history or whatever, it's kind of comes out in this very authoritative way for the most part. Sometimes she's like, there's some questionability here, but for the most part, it's like, this is authoritatively like this happened. And, you know, she gets some of her historical facts wrong, which makes it be like, okay, well, you weren't getting the perfect 100% like information that was totally accurate all the time from whichever of the masters you're talking to, or maybe not. Sometimes she's not talking. Sometimes she is getting it from them. We don't really know. We don't really know how to tell the difference there. But takes us through the cycles of from Lemuria through the 3 different cataclysmic periods of Atlantis, the different races, really hammers home on the idea of like the racial cycles, and this being more like the human race in general as a whole, going through these different phases. So that is fascinating. So I mean, she slams home immediately the idea that we're far more ancient than modern science knows. So she was she was throwing a big middle finger to the institutions of her time, but she was also using the most available scientific data that she could get her hands on to make her arguments. So she wasn't setting all of science aside. She was saying, no, this is extremely valuable. And I mean, the subatomic, that comes from Blavatsky. I mean, I'm sure that, no one in academia probably wants to sort of admit that, but show me where you find subatomic prior to the secret doctrine. Like I myself haven't been able to find that. Right. So she describes the quantum realm. She at least attempts to, in a way that was very much ahead of her time. Right. So she's got that going for her too. And she was bringing in this secret information from the East in a way that I don't know had ever been done before, like she had. She seems to have this omnipresent recollection of so many books, so much information. She's name dropping people from all around the timeline. And it wasn't like a huge Alexandrian library was always following her around. So so sometimes she's just pulling a quote from memory or from one of the masters, who knows. And it's these quotes don't always line up, but sometimes they do. I know I'm going on I'm going on and on, but Blavatsky, she's an interesting case, man.
Yeah.
And one last thing. She described in the beginning of the secret doctrine these libraries, these like hidden underground sort of monasteries filled with, tens of thousands of untranslated scrolls. And since then, we have found some of these sort of underground, monasteries, or some of these places in Tibet with scrolls and scrolls and scrolls that are untranslated. So, I mean, in many different respects, she's been vindicated. I don't necessarily think she would be the most pleasant person to hang around with for most people, right? But, and there's fascinating tales about her, like people being in a restaurant with her and they a tap on their shoulder and they like look over and she's, looking at them. There's all these little anecdotes. So she's got a lot going for her.
And that's everything. It's important that we say all of this, because a lot of what happens in the modern day as well is, we hear about these authors, but a lot of people don't necessarily engage with the texts, and then they kind of hear hearsay. And now a lot of people just have this thing of like, oh, Blavatsky, she was a fraud, right? You don't need to read her secret doctrine. It's like, it's all outdated. And it's like, no, look, she influenced all of occultism, basically. The entire Western tradition. Like, you can read as far and wide as you want, and you'll find Blavatsky trails. Like, I'm a big fan of Dion Fortune. There's Blavatsky trails there. Like, even Ouspensky, even Gurdjieff, like, is technically influenced by her. Even you'll read a random book, like there's one called like The Light of Egypt, which I thought, predated Blavatsky, but it's like, no, he mentions, Isis Unveiled, which is her other monolithic work in that book. And it's like, oh damn, it's like her influence I like what you said, like a comet that came down and the shock waves just spread out and influenced and moved and rejuvenated and everything. She touched all parts of the Western tradition. So I think she gets a lot of disrespect nowadays, and 100% from stories you hear, it's like she probably wasn't the best person to hang out with. She seems pretty intimidating, but I think she definitely deserves more respect nowadays than she gets. And a lot of the criticisms that I think people levy against her or theosophy, the modern theosophical movement in general, what they're actually criticizing is people who came after Blavatsky.
Yeah.
Because like what you said, like, she footnoted everything. I've heard people be like, oh, theosophists, they never do any footnotes. They just make stuff off at the top of their head. And it's like, bro, have you read Blavatsky? It's like footnote after footnote. Like Mercury was in Virgo. So she's just precision. She's like precise, going astrologically. She was a Leo sun. So, quite a fiery personality, but
she doesn't get enough credit, I think, just for she's a good writer. Like, some of her sentences punch so hard and you're just like, ooh, that landed really hard. Especially, it's just like, we'll get to Bruno and Paracelsus too, when they're raving against the institutions, like gosh, their literary capacity just gets elevated. So I love that about her as well.
So now, Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is an interesting guy, to say the least, because we know so little about his origin, although more and more comes. And this is the other thing, he deliberately obscured it as well. And you have multiple people being like, oh, he got it all from India. Oh, he got it all from Persia. Oh, it's just Stoic philosophy. People don't know what to kind of make of him. And there's even one that's like Gurdjieff in Tibet, where people say someone who, like, I think it was like one of the generals who was close to Blavatsky went to Tibet or something, and he claimed to have met Gurdjieff in Tibet, and there was a lama called Lama Dorjieff, and it was Gurdjieff and things like that. And there's this I want to believe kind of thing about Gurdjieff, but no one really knows. No one really knows. He just appears in St. Petersburg in Russia, and is Greek-Armenian guy, and just starts teaching. And what he teaches is this once intimate, phenomenological, psychological system of development, but also an abstract cosmology that goes along with it. And what's blows my mind about it is how not just intricate, but how seamlessly it fits together. Like, that's something I've really appreciated reading his works, because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes you read like something more cosmological, and there's like, they talk about the gods, and then, they'll talk about ritual, or they'll talk about something internal, like authors will talk about something internal, but it's always like, there's this feeling of where's the chain of being? Like, I kind of get that there's this connection from here to there, but what are all the little links? Like, actually, Eliphas Levi has a good explanation in his books, but Gurdjieff, it's just everything comes together so well. And I like it because he also doesn't mince words. He's like, don't believe anything I say. Everything must be practiced, and you have to kind of realize it. It's like, nothing is a given. If something was easy, it wouldn't have any value. So, he's like, it's going to be hard, bro. It's going to be hard. And he really kind of hammers this in. And it's like, it's hard, but it's honest. Because a lot of time, I think people kind of get into this. This is one problem. Some people get into this kind of spiritual work or esoteric occult scene. They get into the Golden Dawn. They do a single practice once, experience a little something, and then immediately they think they're masters, or they're a reincarnation of Jesus or something. And it's like, Gurdjieff was anti that. He's like, no, if something was easy, it has no value. And it's like, kind of beware this. He had a lot of things to say about imagination, which is interesting, but it's interesting. He's very interesting. And he calls himself an esoteric Christian. I see him as almost a Gnostic. I actually do see him as a Gnostic. That's my conspiracy. And Gnostic, not in the sense of demiurgs and dualism, but it's hard to say when you say obtaining of knowledge, because gnosis is knowledge. But when I say knowledge, I don't mean book learning. You just raw data. I mean experiential understanding actually has an energetic effect on the human. And there's this. It's beautiful, his system of creating something, and it's anti-dissolution. So in the more Eastern stuff, or maybe even in Sufi stuff, there's this annihilation of the self, whereas Gurdjieff is kind of anti-annihilation. He's like, no, God needs help with world maintenance and universal laws. So it's kind of like you do create something, but there also needs to be a personality that also, you become not necessarily one with God, but you become something that aids in that aids with the ongoing creation of the universe, that aids with the process of creation. And it's just, I'm a big Gurdjieff fan. I'm a big Gurdjieff fan.
Oh, I know you're a Gurdjieffian deep in your heart. Ooh, yeah. So this is a hard one. They're all kind of hard, man. There's only one that I think isn't hard, but yeah. I mean, my vote is for Blavatsky. So how are we gonna have to what are we gonna do? Do we roll the dice? Like, how do we do this?
Yeah. And so this is actually difficult. Then this is actually difficult because here's the thing. Do you think people can attain just from reading Blavatsky? What do you? Do you
I
think she
think
gives enough practice?
I think there's a lot more people that shouldn't read Blavatsky unless they just want to like get the benefit of being totally overwhelmed and be like, wow, okay, so there's a lot I need to read. Like, so I mean, but you can use the Secret Doctrine as like, you know, what I did with it when I started reading it. As soon as I would come across a source that she kept mentioning over and over, I put it down and I went and read that. This is when I had a lot more time on my hands. I put that down. Okay, George Smith, you know, Library of Ashurbanipal, comparing ancient Babylonian cuneiform with the Old Testament writings. Okay, let's go visit that source, and so on and so on. So I mean, I don't, you know, she kind of leaves you with a lot of pieces kind of all over the place, and it's you'll read 10 pages of her and sort of forget most of it, and it's sort of like it's like a superhuman feat to, I mean, the Secret Doctrine, you could continuously come back to it. So in some senses, it's not practical for everyone to get like this. Her writings are esoteric in the strictly definitional sense of like, not everyone can deal with this information and know even what to do with it. You have to be extremely well read and to get through her pages in extremely dense information. So it's very much an intellectual journey, not so much a turning the mind off and getting back to this more practical, you know, mindfulness kind of thing. I don't know if that answers your question, but she's a laborious one. She's a laborious one.
Because here's the thing, it's like, if it's pure influence, Blavatsky definitely, and I mean, personality-wise, they both had certain unsavory aspects about them. But here's the thing with Gurdjieff. His books are also hard to read, but he writes in a particular way, and I think it does something to your psyche, because he also had knowledge of hypnotism and hypnotherapy and like mesmerism. And when you read his books, the structure, like Beelzebub's Tales, the structure is so weird. But you know what you said? It's like you read 10 pages and you forget. The structure of that book is so weird, because it's not like I remember the entire book off by heart, but there's something about it. And that knowledge just sits different. And there's so much in that book that just kind of sits there kind of at command. Not like necessarily off the top of my head, but if someone came to me and was like, hey, do you remember this? It's like almost them saying that triggers like a thread, and that will pull out the rest of the memory. It's hard what I'm describing, but it's like his book actually has a psychological effect on you as well. At the end of Beelzebub's Tales, he even says there's a lot of people in fourth way schools who are obsessed with lineage. Like, oh, we come from the Bennett lineage. We're the real lineage. Oh, actually, we come from the Ouspensky lineage. We're the real lineage. And at the end of Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff actually says he's looking around at his students and he says, yeah, none of these guys are any good. So I'm writing this book, because people who don't know, Gurdjieff suffered a massive car crash at one point. And it seems after that car, so it seems like he was teaching and he was kind of talking about lineages at one point, like you need to learn from a teacher. After that car crash, he looked around and he was like, nah, none of these works will crystallize in time. I could die at any moment. So he wrote this book. And if you think about the title, Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, it's not to his son. If Gurdjieff is Beelzebub, if the book is just like Beelzebub talking to his grandson, Gurdjieff is kind of Beelzebub in the book. It's Beelzebub talking to us, and we're the grandchild. Why is it not the son? Because the son is his direct students who didn't really end up right. So Gurdjieff has a prescience. He's looking into the future to us right now, who come after his his generation students who talk about lineages. And he's writing this book for us. This is to my grandchildren, to you, to the next generation, to initiate you. This is literally a Barden versus Levy again, almost. It's like one's I find more practical and one's more influential. But
yeah, I'm willing to defer to you. But if we do put Gurdjieff forward, we will miss out on Blavatsky potentially going up against like Albert Pike or Manly P. Hall or one of those guys, which I was looking forward to. But I will defer to your vote on this one.
Here's the thing, because it's so close, but I have to say, like, Another category you could be like is if someone asked you, what book should I read? I would recommend Beelzebub's Tales over Secret Doctrine.
Oh yeah, yeah. Secret Doctrine is not that recommendable of a book. It's very laborious. I do like those anecdotes of, when she makes the tea set, like all of a sudden they find the tea set buried under roots in a foreign country just because one of the guests there like continually pressed her, show us what you can do, and then multiple eyewitnesses come out of there just sort of flabbergasted, like, wow. How did that get down there? There's a lot of those anecdotes. I always like those things. Now, does Gurdjieff have those as well?
Yes, you do hear weird. You do hear weird ones along the vine. Probably the most there's two extravagant ones. One was in his center in Fontainebleau in Paris. There was some guy who was he was either in a tree doing something or he was doing carpentry on the roof, and he fell off and he was wounded. I think he was doing something on the roof and he fell off, and they pulled his body under a tree, and he was quite like out of it and like, concussed, heavily concussed. And they got Gurdjieff from inside the center to come out. And people, basically eyewitnesses, say like Gurdjieff looked the man under the tree and said, "Don't worry, I'll deal with this." And then he did something where he put his hands out, and they said a blue kind of mist came out of the tips of his fingers and went into the guy's body. And then the guy just kind of sat up and was completely okay. And Gurdjieff himself was a bit drained. And Gurdjieff kind of went inside and closed the door and was unreachable for like 4 hours or 8 hours or something. And then he kind of came out at dinner and was like, okay, I'm back to normal. And so
interesting.
He had like power over his... he would call it Handblendzoin with his weird names and whatnot, but his ether, he could project his ether, his well, I guess what Baden would say, like his magnetic fluid, and he could just kind of like
a Reiki. He did like a Reiki healing session on the fly.
But it's not just like on the fly and he instantly healed the guy. It's also like it was visual to some people. That's how thick it was.
Interesting.
That's how thick. And the other story, which is even more extreme, is his car crash story. Apparently, he had this horrible car crash, but the story for it is like he had this car crash which should have killed a man, and he just walked out of the wreckage, but he looked like a corpse. Like he had cuts and gashes over himself and was just bleeding profusely, and just walked home. And people were like, "What the hell?" And apparently, he walked home, sat in a chair, and just wouldn't speak like to anyone. People like, you okay? You want to go to the hospital? And then finally, like I think one of his students like asked him something, and he spoke, and he said, "Can't talk, organs destroyed, making new ones."
Whoa.
And he just kind of went, and then he got up and he would just go around and kind of do things like his blood came out of his ears, and he would just wash the dishes and just behave like a normal person, even though he was like broken. And a week went by and he was completely back to normal or something. He just regenerated.
All right, let's go Gurdjieff. Let's go Gurdjieff.
Okay, Gurdjieff. On the for the cities, for the recommendation of the books. And yeah, he lost to influence, but some of that other stuff was cool.
Teardrop shed from Blavatsky. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Steiner versus Crowley. I think these are guys who everyone knows via reputation.
Yes. All right. I'm going to save us some time on this and put my vote on Steiner right in the beginning.
Why don't you like Crowley? Why don't you like Crowley?
I don't even necessarily have a good reason not to like him. Just people that I trust immensely do not like him, and I know that they probably have good reasons. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I've never read any books by him. It's like when I'm being continuously told to read somebody or something, I'm like, oh, great. That means I should read something else. Like I should read something else that no one else has read, because everybody's probably read Crowley, yes. Right? So it's like I should read something else. I like Steiner because he offers some, admittedly, who knows what's going on. It's mysterious. But I love his descriptions of the pre-materialized astral beings that descend into the world, and that is the true spiritual ancestor to humanity. Because I really do think that at the end of the day, once we really figure out what's going on, that kind of situation is probably closer to the truth than some more mythic kind of Garden of Eden scenario, right? So I love that. I love that he gets into the Atlantis scenario, which everyone has their own opinions about, but I like that he dabbles in that, and he's bringing to the table some of these more parapsychological remote viewing aspects and bringing that into his material, probably doing some kind of channeling there, even though he might go off the rails here or there. He might get into some schizo territory where you're like, how did we end up here? Right. But I like him because of that kind of language and those little aspects. But even still, I'm not deeply read on Steiner. But just from that, I'll put my vote there. Because the stories that I had heard about Crowley, like he was willing to do some unsavory things, all right. But then it's hard to parse this from just the backlash as well. So that's kind of out of my territory.
Yeah, I think one of the best takes on Crowley actually comes from someone not on this list. Dion Fortune has some very funny takes on Crowley. There's a great book, actually, which is a dual biography of Dion Fortune and Crowley by Alan Richardson, or something like that. That book's great because in the back of that book, they show, because people have this perspective, fans of Dion Fortune say, no, she had her and Crowley only ever met once. There was basically no relationship. And then people who are really, really into Crowley are like, no, Dion Fortune was basically purely a student of Crowley, and Dion Fortune is basically doing Thelema. And what this guy shows in the back is, it's true that Dion Fortune and Crowley met only once in their life, but apparently they had this huge letter correspondence, and he actually transcribes one of the letters in the back of his book, and it's hilarious. Because Dion Fortune talks in her books about Crowley, and she says something like, he's a genius, but I wouldn't do any of his practices. Like, read him for his theory, and then she mentions something about his Kabbalah, how he changes like some of the numbers. So if you were to do the practice, it would activate the Cliffoth and the demons instead of the Sephiroth and the angels, just to like troll people. So she was like, theoretically, he's a genius, but don't do the practices. But there's this letter from Dion Fortune to Crowley where Dion Fortune speaks, and she basically opens up being like, oh, I got your tarot. It's brilliant. It's amazing. There's all of this. And then she just kind of says something like, by the way, I was reading one of your books and you said this bit and my mind is too feminine to like understand your genius here. Can you explain this to me? And then she asked something really technical. And when you read that, you're like, oh, I see what's going on here. She's mining him. Because Dion Fortune is very intelligent, but she never left England. And when you look at Crowley, it's like, we know about Crowley in retrospect historically. But back in the day, if you hear about him, it's like this vaguely aristocratic guy he went around the world. He went to China. He actually went to like India. He's well-worn and experienced a whole bunch of things. So if you know a guy like that, if you're locked to the continent of England and you know that guy, surely you'd send some letters and be like, hey, what does this guy know? And so she was kind of praising his ego. And then she was just drawing out any knowledge that was useful. And I was like, that's very funny. But that thing that she says, it's like, he was a genius, but I wouldn't do his practices. And I got to say, Crowley is probably highly practical, almost on the level of Franz Barden. That's one thing that a lot of people admit. He is highly practical. But I like what Dave the Amateur Magus said at one point. It's like when you read Crowley, he'll say something genius, and then you turn the page, and he goes complete cocaine mode and ruins it. That's basically Crowley in a nutshell. The only thing I'll give to Crowley over Steiner is it's way easier to read Crowley. He's funny, whereas Steiner is dry and German. And I love Steiner, and Steiner gives really good stuff, insights like you said. Fantastic. And he's also more rigorously trained as a philosopher. Like Steiner was very deep into the German idealist movement, but also I think there's some deep lore where Steiner was he wasn't Nietzsche's secretary, because Nietzsche was I don't think Nietzsche had died, but Nietzsche was like bedridden and insane by the time like Steiner was 19 or something. But I think Steiner was like hired as a part of the archives of Nietzsche's kind of like Nietzsche's archives, and he dipped into like Nietzsche's philosophy quite deeply, and it's just. So he has this strong foundation of German idealism and the Nietzschean vitalism that comes after, and it's like, yeah, he's more. The only thing I can say is he's a bit dry, and maybe less practical than Crowley, but Crowley has so many negatives, and with influence, I actually think they're even, because Crowley in the magic world. Maybe, but it's like, oh, and he influenced art. But look, Steiner, biodynamics, Steiner, child rearing, Steiner, even in architecture, he's remembered. It's like both these guys are highly influential. And I'm going to give it to Steiner, because he's just more of a savory person.
Yes, I would have rather shared a smoke with Steiner, no doubt.
Yes.
With Crowley, I would always feel like he's up to something. He's trying to pull one on me, I
would invite Steiner over to my house. With Crowley, I would go to coffee with him on neutral territory with knowledge that my wife is safe far away.
Yeah, that gives us the vote to Steiner just in and of itself right there. Okay.
And
now,
oh
my gosh,
the bottom of the left tier, we got Manly P. Hall versus Albert Pike. I'll let you lead this one, because I know Manly P. Hall, but Albert Pike, I'm rough on.
Well, Albert Pike, I mean, his morals and dogma is another one of these where, I don't want to say he was doing something unprecedented, but in terms of being like that, this is a Masonic publication, totally unprecedented, at least as far as what we have, what actually made it out of the sort of the closed circles, because Morals and Dogma wasn't supposed to reach the public. It was only supposed to get into the hands of Masons, possibly even just Scottish Rite Masons. But of course, it was such a landmark feat, so dense with great information that it stuck around. And he was doing things that Blavatsky did prior to Blavatsky, making like, and I've always had this suspicion, I don't know, but I've always had the suspicion that when Blavatsky was referring to like the esoteric Masons, that she was aware of Pike, but I don't know how she would have had access to the Morals and Dogma. So I haven't figured that one out yet, but they didn't reference each other, right? Of course, Pike didn't reference her, but yeah, Pike was doing things in an unprecedented
do you know
way.
What era they were both in? Were they contemporaries, or did Pike come first and then Blavatsky?
Pike came first, but I think there was a point where they would have been contemporary. Yeah, I could check the dates, but we don't need to do all that. But he traveled around. I mean, he was a general in the Confederacy, heading these Native American companies, which apparently was extremely stressful, because if you hear stories about the Native Americans, when they like, this goes for many of the different tribes, when they made a decision and stuff, and like, or when they felt like their honor was on the line, like they stuck to their guns, and no one could persuade them otherwise, right? This happens all the time in the French and Indian War. You piss off one chieftain and their whole tribe leaves, and you never hear from them again, and it's like, wow, we lost all their support. So imagine trying to lead companies of Native Americans in a war that they don't even know if they want to fight, right? It's already messy. But anyway, if you look at Pike's early poetry, a lot of people just focus on the Morals and Dogma, but his early poetry is beautiful. I mean, he's writing in his early 20s. Like he has a poem on Hermes. I think he's like 22, and he gets Hermes. He understands exactly the Hermes archetypal mind. And it is like so clear if you read his poem on Hermes. So I love that at an early age, you see these flashes of this spiritual, like, reserve of high energy there. And he travels all throughout the West, keeps journals about his travels. So those still survive. that's really cool to get into, because he turns into kind of like a natural philosopher, a rugged sort of bushman, you know, in the fur trade at the time. So I love that ruggedness to him. And then he starts later in his life, he starts translating source Sanskrit texts, translating the Vedas and whatnot. It's really hard to get your hands on one of these copies, but you know, that who else was doing that? There was no one in the world doing that. And as Manly P. Hall pointed out in his lectures on Pike, like there was only a few people in the English speaking world that could have been qualified to do this at the time. And it's like Pike and who's the German guy that I'm forgetting?
Schopenhauer?
No. Oh, the guy that wrote shelves of books.
The Mueller guy.
Yes, Max Mueller. Yes, that guy. That, you know, he says, oh, it was only Pike and Mueller could have been able to give us like translations and good commentaries on this material. So he was a comparative genius. He does make those kind of 19th century sort of errors of one-to-one equations, right? Saying like Hiram Abiff is Hermes. And it's like, well, we know that's can never be literally true. So it's like, you know, sometimes and Manly P. Hall is guilty of this as well in some cases. But, you know, we sort of, I think we know what they're getting at archetypally. But, yeah, Albert Pike, man, he left a mark that will never be removed on Freemasonry, especially in the West, to the point where he overshadows some of these earlier Masons who were doing these kind of things, but kind of outside of the Masonic umbrella. Chevalier Ramsey, for instance, is the big, I mean, his 1,000-page magnum opus, you know. So and Albert Pike, he has all these other books that are kept sort of in closed Masonic circles, or they're like, you know, they're pretty expensive, so no one buys them, like his Esoterica commentary on like the Blue Lodge degrees and whatnot. Extremely well read, very great writing, great insights. He'll bring a tear to your eye occasionally, right? But people want to hate on him because his Confederacy ties and things like that. So, you know, some people would get a little sensitive on that account. But he mentions
Lucifer, and there's all these conspiracy theories online, as you've pointed out.
Yeah. So yeah, I did the whole thing on Albert Pike's Lucifer and everyone taking that out of context because they like to just pick this one sentence. And literally, if you read the preceding and the next sentence, so it's like all you guys making these arguments have just never read. You've clearly never read the material, and it's just immediately obvious when you try to say this stuff. And his letters about predicting World War III, those never happened, right? So yeah, Albert Pike, man, he's an interesting figure, and you know, Morals and Dogma should be on your bookshelf eventually. Please get that, because it is a trove. I mean, there's so much information there. All right, I love Manly P. Hall too, so this is gonna break my heart one way or another. But I'll put Manly P. Hall in your hands.
Well, it's hard because, like, you know, I know a little bit about. I like Manly. And Secret Teachings of All Ages is, to call it influential is an understatement. Like Beelzebub's Tales, Secret Doctrine, and the Secret Teachings of All Ages are like this trinity. Maybe even, but that's hard. Because when I look at these guys, it's like, you know, Morals and Dogma could be the fourth face on the Mount Rushmore of like kind of early modern, Western esotericism. But Manly P. Hall, in the truest sense, you could call him the like occult scholar. And people forget what he kind of lived through, because he was born in literally 1900, like 1900, and he died in the 90s. He died the year I was born. So he would have lived through Crowley. He would have lived through Gurdjieff. He would have lived like almost through Krishnamurti. All of these things he would have lived through. And it's like he was honorary Freemason, 33 degrees, almost an inexhaustible amount of literature and essays he wrote continuously all throughout his life. The only negative thing I have to kind of say about him is he didn't seem to, in the initiatic sense, you hear stories of him kind of just being a grumpy old man behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And then there's his kind of death. And it's just kind of disappointing. that he, kind of got succumbed to just some random fraudulence, some con men, and then
and I forget that guy's name because his name shouldn't be remembered, but that guy clearly was pulling one over on him and probably murdered him. He does the whole phone call to the police and then wait, not really, he's not really dead, and then calls later to confirm that he is dead. Manly P. Hall is found. There's already ants crawling on him. So that's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy.
Manly P. Hall, I don't think he took care of his body. He's not the kind of guy that's going out on a jog in the mornings and whatnot. Now I'm not saying that I don't know what that tells us about as far as this tournament goes, but it's interesting insights. I mean, I vote Manly P. Hall because he's so impactful to the modern conversation right now. Like, way more people are going to know about Manly P. Hall, and he had such a big impact on my life, more than Albert Pike, and I read both of their magnum opuses, right?
Because Secret Teachings is also a book that I would probably recommend to any intro.
Yeah,
perfect intro.
I purchased that book for like my normie friends and family to be like, this is where you could start, and just pick a chapter and jump in there and have your mind blown, right? And I like that he, philosophers back in the day, they used to have to get patrons to really make something of themselves, or else they're kind of like, they're the poor guy living out this tragedy, but they still manage to like figure it out. They're like a Paracelsus or something. So Manly P. Hall, he got early on, he sort of got like $1 million from a widowed lady that helped fund his travels and fund all of his adventures in his 20s, that he produced the teachings from. Like, he wrote that in his 20s. I believe it was published when he was 26, but he wrote it in his early 20s. And
that's people that forget, like, that entire book is early 20s. That's insane.
I actually think, I have a theory that books like that cannot be written outside of like your youthful vigor years. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I mean, he clearly was tapping into that hermetic fire. And his writing in there is so impactful. And his pamphlets, his lectures,
because his lectures have so much wisdom in them.
Yes, and they still ring out there. Like, a lot of people are still listening to his lectures. We don't have that from anyone else on this list. That's really awesome that his voice is still ringing through people's ears. I mean, in dark periods of my life, I would throw on some Manly P. Hall lectures, and he would console me from the grave. That is that's interesting to me. So like,
with the lectures, I would say probably the only one close to him would be Steiner, with Steiner's lectures. But
that's right.
Even then, Manly, once again, Steiner can be a little dry. Manly's fun to listen to.
Yes. Yeah. He's got some humorous bits here or there. He can make the crowd laugh unintentionally all the time. His ability to just lecture on and on about these subjects is profound. So I think he was meant to do exactly what he did. Exactly what he did. And I haven't visited the PRS yet, but I will eventually make it there to stand in the grandeur that he left behind.
Okay. So you want to Manly P. Hall over Albert Pike for?
I say Manly, yes, and it is hard. That's heartbreaking as well, but it is what it is.
Okay, Manly P. Hall wins via having too much Riz. Okay. Now we're going. No, we've done an hour in.
Oh my God! Yeah, we're really. Let's go. Okay,
let's go.
Oh, this is the hardest. This was the hardest one on the list for me.
Okay, so starting from the top on the right side now, Giordano Bruno versus Paracelsus.
Oof. A lot of similarities, a lot of overlap in some cases here, right? I was thinking like Paracelsus probably healed more people.
That's true.
He probably healed more people in his time. But they both probably pissed an equal amount of people off in their time.
That's true.
Yes. So it's, oh man, this is so difficult because they're both rogues. They both get sort of kicked out of these places and persecuted. Paracelsus seems to slip away from actually getting arrested. I think at one point he does get arrested in one place, but gets out of it. And he writes at one point, like, you people probably want to burn me, just like you want to burn, Martin Luther, etc. So his life was in danger, but it seems like he was very committed. He was committed to what he was doing. He was committed to the physician's art. And, stories of him traveling far and wide as probably a very poor man on his horse, with his sword and his sort of misshapen features, probably not a handsome feller, and that probably colored his relationship with the women there. But yeah, he gets his position in Basel, and it doesn't even last a year because he doesn't even want to lecture in Latin. He doesn't want to follow the rules. He's pissing a lot of people off. Right.
And both these guys are revolutionaries in that sense. Like, Giordano Bruno with his cosmology and Paracelsus with his medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. They're both sons of Hermes very much. Right. Bruno is using Hermes as a character in his dialogues in a way that really makes sense. He really understands, I think, Hermes, and he had access to the Corpus Hermeticum that I don't think Paracelsus did. And Paracelsus is called by later followers, the second Hermes, the Hermes Trismegistus of mechanical arcana, the German Hermes, right? So these two guys, they represent two different streams of what can be loosely called the Hermetic tradition of, Renaissance, etc., right? Paracelsus in the more alchemical sense, going back to the Emerald Tablet, the as above, so below. He makes a lot of he describes a lot of things along those terms of the microcosm, macrocosm, right? So clearly there's that Emerald Tablet kind of alchemical, medical hermetic strain there, whereas Giordano Bruno had the benefit of the Corpus Hermeticum, using Ficino's and Lazzarelli's translations. So gosh, I'm so torn on these guys.
I think, for me, here's how I think of it in my head. Paracelsus, he has a little bit more of a mystery about him because he also left his country. He traveled around. He went all around, to Russia, down into, I think he attempted to get into Asia, but, he came through. He kind of went on a similar journey, to Christian Rosencrantz, and that's where I was kind of go, is like he's kind of the template for later Rosicrucians in that sense. So he has this well-traveled kind of gentleman. It's a mystery where he gets all these things. He pioneers elemental magic, like the sylphs, the undines, the nereids, the salamanders and the gnomes and pygmies. A lot of that's Paracelsus. And so it's just like, I think the archetype of the medieval occultist magician is almost like more Paracelsus in that sense.
Yes.
And it's like, I gotta respect Giordano Bruno, but I think I'll put myself in the Paracelsus camp. I'll put myself in the Paracelsus camp over Bruno.
Okay,
because he definitely has that influence, and then I don't know, Giordano Bruno, outside of maybe Italian esoteric schools, and maybe some Masonic lodges that kept some of his art of memory alive.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And it was a Mason who carved that famous statue of him that's sits there right now. We got to respect Bruno in the sense that he spent 7 to 8 years in prison, right? A lot of that time, most of that time, without writing materials, and it didn't break him, because as an eyewitness reports, when he was about to get burned alive, someone gave him this last chance to sort of kiss the crucifix or whatever, and he famously turns away. And this is kind of like the Emperor Julian sort of, Emperor Julian, his whole family was murdered by Christians, and he was raised to be a Christian, but he says, you know what, you guys disgust me. And it wasn't like you know, we can't create this whole criticism of all of the history, but for him, for Julian, which I see some comparisons here, it was like the guys that I'm around that profess to be pious Christians, you guys murdered my family. I can't, I'm done with you guys, right? I think Bruno, you know, he was arguing against a lot of these entrenched dogmatic Christians as well. And the thing is about that kind of story is it's so timeless. It's a situation that persists till this day. So everyone has found in Bruno that sort of the
rebel archetype.
Yes, and I would say a pious rebellion against the entrenched dogmatism that tries to create all of these rules. You know, he was going deep back in the pagan texts and unearthing a lot of things there, and writing about it in this very mysterious way, and using Vulcan as this, you know, archetype of the fiery intellect, you know, that can almost masonically you can use to craft your life. Yeah, I'm torn on this. It's a dice roll on these guys. I almost want to just say Bruno because of just how brutally it all ended for him, and the fact that, you know, though he recanted sometimes in the beginning, he always said, like, he always kind of recanted the recant in a way and said, screw you, y'all let me out, like, joke's on you. But in the end, he held on to his principles. And, you know, now we're figuring out, okay, the aliens exist, you know, there's other planets around the suns. That was a very key scientific element for him that he offered. And, you know, the Catholic Church still doesn't like this guy. There's still Catholics out there writing these like scathing critiques of him. So, you know, he gets under their skins like so much.
Bruno Renaissance coming up.
But the fire got under his skin and roasted him alive. And that is something that, you know, the world should never forget.
Okay. Well, I'm good to secede to Bruno. If you want to go Bruno. Let's go Bruno. Okay. You convinced me with your passion.
Yes.
Okay. So next is a, I don't know if this is hard or easy, but it's a bit of an imbalanced one, because we have Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, the author of the OCCULT, the 3 books of occult philosophy, and then versus Iamblichus, the OG, the GOAT, on the mysteries.
All right, quick one for me. Quick one for me. It's Iamblichus for me.
Iamblichus just destroys. Yeah, this is a bit of a sweep for Iamblichus. It's hard because, and this is hard as well because influentially as well, Agrippa, I know they say no one kind of continued his work because he was white magic, and everyone kind of went more Solomonic, more lesser key. Everyone was trying to work Goetia around his time, and they kind of ignored him. But there's this one guy, Francis Barat, who drew a lot from Agrippa and synthesized that book into a book called The Celestial Intelligencer, which is now translated as the Magus. And that book influenced Levi. And then Levi influenced the entire modern occult scene. So it's this thing of, and then Agrippa's this middle point, you know, he draws from the Platonists. So he says a lot of good things. He says some interesting stuff about hermetics. He literally writes the book on magic with all its correspondences and all these little weird tidbits about it. He just goes off onto the fun tangents about how Scythian women have like the ability to like kill people with their eyes because they have eyes like basilisks. And it's just like, there is something to say for Agrippa, but I don't know.
Well, clearly there is, because he made the list, right?
Yeah,
he made the list.
Yeah, but so then again,
yes, then again, you're standing against the giant that is Iamblichus, and still an underread feller, if I must say. Not necessarily easy to read. It's certainly not your first few times in there. Oh man, I mean, you know, his first sentence in on the mysteries clarifies the entire like Corpus Hermeticum Hermes Trismegistus mystery. It's like, who was Hermes Trismegistus? Well, the Egyptian priests, you know, they were ascribing their most profound wisdom to Hermes Trismegistus. Clearly, this inspirational honorific, this divine presence coming through the priests that were in this lineage, whatever you want to call it at this point, a school, et cetera, et cetera. You know, not sure about all that there, but But Iamblichus was he was having real experiences, because how he describes things, you can tell that he's experienced dream divination, and that he was around a lot of people that did that, because he has actual still applicable tools to offer in that account. He talks about voices coming to you when you're waking up out of sleep, the hypnopompic phenomena, right? And I've had this. I know other people have had this as well. It's a weird thing. You feel like there's a voice in the room coming out, and he goes into detail and tries to describe what's going on there. So it's like he can offer very practical things that we can put into action today, right? And he describes the luminous phenomena that show up sort of above these temple settings, above the ritual settings, right? He wows his students from time to time as they're like pressing him to show us what you can do. He's catty about it, and he's sort of sacred about it, but he shows it off here or there in a reverential way, right? Neo-Pythagorean, Neoplatonist. He knew his business. And that's so clear. He wrote the life of Pythagoras and described the Pythagorean school, the Pythagorean cult. I don't know that there's another source that gives us those key bits of information, because he had access to sources that we just don't have access to today. So he's a very important source on the philosopher himself, Pythagoras, right?
And he also organized the Platonic curriculum and all of that stuff. There's
yes.
so much, there is actually so much. And as you're speaking, I'm like, this was probably a bad matchup for poor Agrippa. Like, I like Agrippa, but he's just getting outclassed in all the areas.
Yeah. We'll come back to Iamblichus, but I think he definitely takes this one. But hey, yeah. Agrippa made the list.
I'm so sorry, Agrippa. Okay, but speaking of Pythagoras, next up we have Hermes Trismegistus versus Pythagoras. How do you square this one? Because Pythagoras is the original philosopher. Pythagoras has got everything. Pythagoras, and Pythagoras has the experiences. He has the initiation. He could experience things outside of the body. He could biolocate, be in two places at once. There's stories of him invoking the waters, and the river or the ocean speaks back to him. And
yes,
he has aphorisms. He allegedly influences the world of mathematics. But then we have Hermes Trismegistus, and a mythological figure for sure. But we attribute the entire classics, the technical and the philosophical Hermetica. Any book that has Hermes in it as a reference is technically a Hermetic text. So how do we square this, Colin?
It's not an easy one for me, but I mean, it is important to point out that Hermes Trismegistus as an individual in history probably never existed, right? It was probably this more mythic archetype. But did Thoth ever actually exist? Yeah. Like, I'm inclined to say that Thoth might have been an actual being at one point, and that that gets a little unpopular for some folks. All right, so it's like Hermes Trismegistus stands in many different places at once. In one sense, it's like it's sort of a god presence, this carryover of Thoth, right, presiding over the sort of seven arts and sciences, all of those intellectual and creative arts, right? He shows up in so many places. And Iamblichus is telling us that Pythagoras and Plato were inspired by Hermes in Egypt when they went. Like, if Iamblichus is telling the truth, Pythagoras lived 22 years in Egypt. And even if, he probably did go to Egypt, right? If we're just going to be a little loose, we don't have all the facts here. But Pythagoras and a bunch of the seven sages and so forth, they went to Egypt because Egypt was it was a society. This is even normie Egyptologists say this. The society was built around the immortality of the soul and everything that connects to that, right? So Hermes Trismegistus, being a later amalgamation of Thoth and the Greek Hermes, the true, Thoth is so ancient, and then you get this later figure that comes up, sort of you know, is it a physical continuation? Probably not, but in spirit, it is certainly a continuation. You know, the Greeks understood Hermes Trismegistus to equate to Thoth, right? And many of them made that equations themselves, right? You know, I say Hermes. I say Hermes
Okay.
just because I think that there's more to the story of Hermes that we literally have not uncovered yet, like archaeologically and everything else, that we will eventually uncover. And, you know, if I want to give credit to the legends, Pythagoras learned something or two from Hermes Trismegistus or the priests of Thoth in his time, right? So I gotta go my boy Hermes with this one.
Because this is hard. I was thinking, because this is basically the archetype versus a man himself, like who's more practical in a sense. But it's like, yeah, you do kind of make that case, and there is that like, I'm not sure how much more of Pythagoras we can get. And Pythagoras, once again, he learnt from other places. We have knowledge of other sources. We know his Pythagorean theorem was found to predate him on, what is it, Babylonian statues. There's a Babylonian statue holding like a tablet which has his theorem on it that predates him. And so there are all of these. And with Hermes, yeah, I think, what is it? There's that, correct me if I'm wrong, is it the tomb of Petosiris?
Yes.
Where they found like a line where it's like Thoth the great, and it continues, says Thoth and then great 3 times, and we have Hermes Trismegistus. It's like,
right, yeah,
there's clearly a link.
Yeah, and the people that want to say, oh, there's not enough evidence for this link, you know, I mean, you know where I stand firmly on the side that no, the link, there is obviously a link here. It's just that the Greek-speaking Egyptians living in a totally different time, after Egypt had already possibly eroded a little bit from all of these takeovers and the Persians and everything. You know, maybe the Corpus Hermeticum is kind of this like last attempt to sort of bring in whatever they could get of the ancient Egyptian tradition and adapt it to the modern world so that it could reach new audiences. But even still, we have Manetho, 3rd century BC, telling us that Hermes already wrote books way before him, right? We have like references to Hermetica I think even until the 4th century, in the 4th century BC. So, you know, we just don't have the physical links, all of them that we want. But we have in the sources, at least, you know, that they are telling us that those links exist. Zosimus of Panopolis is telling us that these links exist, and he was an actual practicing sort of hermetist, and probably did work at the House of Life, you know, with the priests of Thoth and everything. So, you know, Hermes rides that mythical edge because he kind of is tied up with this god. And then you get later things like Edgar Cayce saying that Hermes built a pyramid, you know, sort of, you know, he's everywhere. Hermes is everywhere. And he gets that little bit of that Greek god Hermes, who was always so much fun in there as well.
And I mean, look, you know, the Hermetica did basically, you know, come in and restart the Renaissance along with Plato and all of that. So he has a second life that influences us to this day.
Yeah.
So sorry, Pythag. But Hermes...
It's okay, Pythagoras. You would have beaten out pretty much anyone on the other side of the bracket. So it's like, it's okay.
Okay. Zoroaster versus Jesus Christ. So Zoroaster is basically the original archetype of the magician, according to some. According to some, he would wear a robe like of stars, and like would live in a cave and kind of things like that. So he's almost like a Merlin archetype.
Yes, but not much is known about him, right? He's, you know, I'm willing to, I totally believe that he existed, that Zarathustra existed. But even their early sources don't necessarily agree on when he existed. I think scholarship is saying it's more like, you know, 7th, 6th century BC, which puts him very early at the sort of golden chain, right? And so let's think about, if we think about Zoroaster in the Western esoteric mythos, you know, he is always sitting at kind of the very beginning of this Prisca Theologia, the golden chain of ancient philosophers. And, you know, part of that is kind of a misnomer because they thought that the Chaldean oracles were Zoroastrian. They weren't really Zoroastrian. They weren't even Chaldean, right? Yeah, I love how messy it gets. But, Zoroastrianism, very, very profound religion. I wish we had more philosophic texts related there, but it offers us a lot of myths that clearly influenced. I would make the argument influenced a lot of later traditions. I think the angelology of Zoroastrianism crept into Judaism and Christianity. I think that, don't pin me on the dualism term because everyone gets a little finicky about that term these days. But like the Ahriman and Ahura Mazda cosmic dualism, that is a fascinating myth that is very much fleshed out in the Zoroastrian texts that we do have and some of those later writings. And I mean, Ahriman or Rahman is the different versions of that.
And then
That is the
influences later
original.
thinkers like Steiner.
Yeah, that's the original Dark Lord. I
Yeah.
stand behind him as the original Dark Lord. I mean, it gets a little creepy. What is it? The Bunda Hisson is the text that fleshes all of that out. Yeah, Zoroaster is fascinating. I mean, I wish we knew more about the guy himself, but the religion still survives to this day. One of the oldest religions, the first monotheistic religion. Some people like to say. I quibble with the term monotheism, but it's a whole other thing. But they got a lot going for them. There's a lot of universals there, and then it breaks down to these simple things: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. I mean, boom. If you don't have that in your religious, in your spiritual orientation, you don't have anything. In my opinion, you gotta have that positivity, that goodness. The reorientation to the light, which Zoroaster and his later followers were always pointing us to. Oh man. Well, I'll let you pick up on Jesus, but yes.
I mean, well, in this context, who is Jesus?
Right.
In this context, he's an occultist, and it should be noticed to remember that Jesus is seen in a certain way by, alchemists and perhaps Christian Kabbalists. I wouldn't say Kabbalists, but Christian Kabbalists. Like, they called Jesus, what is it, the second Adam? So like the first Adam kind of messed things up. And then the second Adam, Jesus comes and kind of redeems and restarts, does things correct. But he's also, Jesus is seen as an alchemist in this sense. Like, look at Jesus, the story. It's like turning water into wine. Is that not alchemy? Is that not a transmutation of one substance into another? So the alchemists in medieval time, like Paracelsus, like Agrippa, like Thomas Vaughan, would look at Christ or look at Jesus and be like, this is the model. This is the perfect alchemist. This is what we got to do. We got to be like this guy. And so as an archetype, as an individual who's seen as something of, like Pico della Miranda would say, it's like the Christ is, what's the line? It's like the miracles of Christ are best described with the study of magic. It's like magic proves the Christ's miracles. So it's like, there's this interplay with the world of magic, alchemy, and Kabbalah, and Jesus in this sense, which a lot of people, obviously Christians would rather die than admit. And this is the thing I always say, like, people always get like, Christians always get a little salty and like, no, you can't do all of this occultism. And it's like, man, have you read like anything by Heinrich Agrippa? That guy had more piety in his pinky toe than the majority of Christians nowadays. It's like insane how, pious, as you were saying, like good thoughts, good words, good deeds, these guys would have. It becomes hard because it's, what do we have of Jesus? In the sense, we have the Gospels.
Yeah.
And but then again, even Gurdjieff would say, Gurdjieff does say at one point, with just the Gospels as a religion, that's one of the most perfect religions. Like, he actually respects just the Gospels.
I think
just the sayings.
I think Jesus is going to be the clear winner here, because it's hard to, he is Jesus. I mean, there's the influence doesn't need to be fleshed out, but it's like, the mystery is we just don't know. We don't know the historical Jesus. Everyone agrees that he existed, but who he actually was is just, that's so much more part of the mystery. I don't,
because this is one of the things where, like, the older person doesn't win. Because you could say, like, Jesus, look, his mysteries are a continuation of, where did the three wise men come from? Or the three magi, as we should call them.
Right.
It's like, it's a passing over from one to another. So these Persian mysteries, these Zoroastrian mysteries, in a sense, are passing their light, their fire, onto the next thing. Mithraism, which is also Persian, also influences Christianity. But then now we're talking about religions. I'm talking about the individual occultists.
well, it's also important to point out, like, there was so much early mystical, bizarre literature that came after Jesus about Jesus in one or another light, separating in so many different directions, right at those earliest periods, that just, it wasn't included in the Bible, sometimes for pretty good reasons, because, a lot of these texts, it's like, what are we really going to make of this? But it's like, not only do we have all of the New Testament that we know and love, right? We have like all of the Nag Hammadi. At one point in Egypt, there were Gnostics reading non-canonical texts and, books from the Corpus Hermeticum, right? So, and then you look at those early Christians like Synesius of Cyrene, who did not accept any of the dogmas, but was still elevated to the position of Bishop of Ptolemais, right? But he said, I'm not going to, Platonism is my school. He says that repeatedly, says why, but then he becomes a bishop. So in the early Christianities, there seems to be a lot more leeway until you get around kind of like an Athanasius figure who's super like, follow the Nicene Creed, or you're a heretic and you're just a devil worshiper, right? So it's just like with any sort of cult leader or whatever, their followers can come afterwards and mess a lot of things up, But if we try to glimpse it in that early light, I mean, the revelations of the Magi, this text I just picked up, right? It tries to fill in the gaps about the Magi who come in and they see Jesus at his birth and they give him these gifts. Well, they tell a story. This is a late 2nd century text. Like, that's pretty early as far as it goes, right? They tell the story of the pre-incarnate Jesus showing up as this orb of light that is like shifting and stuff. It shifts into a pillar sometimes, and it finds the Magi in this far off unknown country in the East. It finds these group of Magi and it brings them into the cave. And each one of the Magi has a different vision of the star child that comes out of this orb and speaks to them, and it gives them psychedelic provisions, and they have these visions, after, like, this star child gives them this sort of sacred food and then leads them to Bethlehem and whatnot. So just like the other Christian apocryphal texts, there seems to be this whole mystical layer and this more complete system, this more esoteric system that a lot of the earlier Christians had, and they believed strongly that they had. They believed in this just like any Baptist fundamentalist is going to believe in the virgin birth or something. And it's like, who are we to say that they had, that they were incorrect, that they weren't closer to the reality of the true historical Jesus, right? So I don't know. It's a clear win for Jesus for me, and one day I hope we solve the mystery as to who this fella really was.
Okay. One last question before we... let me just ask you this question, though. Just purely on the individuals, Zoroaster and Jesus, who do you think would win in a fight?
Ooh, Zoroaster, because Jesus would turn that cheek, bro. Yeah.
I mean...
Zoroaster, they probably wouldn't fight. They'd probably just sit down and just be like, hey...
I don't know. Zoroaster seemed to be a bit of a warrior, but
yeah.
But okay. I'll go. I'm happy to go Jesus, but I don't know. I'm a little undecided, but I'll go Jesus. We'll go Jesus just because.
Well, if you think that Jesus is too overpowered, that would be one of the reasons I would put Zoroaster up there. But we can run with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be Jesus versus Hermes next, so I kind of do want to see where that goes.
Okay.
But no.
Oh God.
Okay. Round two. So Eliphas Levi versus Gurdjieff. Now, so a Frenchman, a pompous Frenchman who's into a little bit of magic versus what is it? An Armenian Greek guy who speaks Russian and may, may or may not be rizzing up some of his female students. Who do you go for?
Well, if there's some personal sort of like, all right, you did some nefarious things, and like we got evidence to suggest, then I'm inclined to look at the other guy. But once again, I don't know too much about both of these figures. I'm inclined to vote for Levy though, because because he's closer to my heart in terms of how he frames the Western tradition, how he makes his comparisons. He leaves us with some of his experiences and whatnot. And I thoroughly enjoyed his book, The History of Magic. Though I had some disagreements here or there, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, here's the way I look at it is, in the end, LFS Levy did influence quite a group of people. I don't know anyone who's a part of an LFS Levy group. I don't know. Whereas Gurdjieff, there are Gurdjieff groups. There's fourth way groups. I don't know anyone who just read Levy and kind of attained. Whereas, like, well, it's arguably the question on attainment is always arguable. But Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, people that came after him, and I don't know, the system itself. Once again, I'm more read on Gurdjieff than I am Levy. But there is something to say. Like, look, Levy does have practical stuff. Levy does have correct philosophy. He's very metaphysical, but it's also my video of my channel. Gurdjieff wins.
Let's go Gurdjieff. Let's put him up against Manly P. Hall, because that's who I'm going to vote for on this next one.
Really? Okay, so for the next one, we're blasting through. Okay, Steiner versus Manly P. Hall. You really want Manly P. Hall over Steiner?
I want him up there.
Okay, so that's interesting though, because I don't know. These guys are so similar. Because once again, lectures, huge amount of lectures versus Manly P. Hall, huge amount of lectures from Steiner.
I love the story about when Manly P. Hall is super young and he's on Wall Street, right? And someone runs out of, I guess one of the stock trading offices at Wall Street and blows his brains out. And Manly P. Hall saw that, and he's just like, this whole cabal of money worshiping nonsense is not for me. I love that little tidbit there. And I think he brought little fascinating parts of history into the discussion that I had never seen anyone else really flesh out and discuss, like those, the eternal flames in the temples, all these neat little stories, right? The way he describes, the way he sort of, romanticizes the poemandries in the secret teachings, that solidified my fascination with Hermes early on. And I just love his language. And I know, on no uncertain terms, he inspired so many people to become Masons like today.
Yes.
Right. And usually the people who I know that have read Manly P. Hall and whatnot, it's always makes for like a brighter discussion, and we can always touch on those aspects and get back to sort of what I think is the true purpose of Masonry and more of the esoteric Masonry there. And if you read his Lost Keys of Freemasonry, which he wrote when he was not a Mason, by the way, it is, that book is so passionate. There's so much passion in that book, and he's firing you up. Like he is saying, Masonry needs to get back to its original purpose, which has always seemed to be this kind of unattainable Age of Astria kind of thing. But if we can bring it into our personal lives on this more practical level, it's going to benefit everyone. Right. So, I love, he's left such a good legacy behind him. All of his pamphlets are just gold. They're just gold, He brings a lot of information to the table. His influence is clear, and he's really not pushing any scams. Maybe he made some errors here or there, but he's a solid guy all the way around. And his lectures, man, that he was given when he was really old, he became kind of like my grandpa, kind of like the cynic on the rocking chair. sort of like what is going on with the Western world. And some of his lectures about some of that stuff, just they'll make you cry. They'll make you cry if you really, listen to it. So yeah, Manly has my heart, and I'm so biased for him right now. Yeah,
it's interesting. So because it's interesting what you said about the like little side stories and tidbits, and they're all historical, and it's very interesting. With Steiner, he gives side stories as well, but he gives them from experience. So like I mentioned the Nietzsche thing. There's like one story he says, I think he actually does go and meet Nietzsche when Nietzsche's like catatonic. And he says he uses his clairvoyance and sees that like the thread connecting the astral body to the physical body is just so fine. It looks like it can snap like via a blow of wind or something. And then he like looks into Nietzsche's past lives and sees that before he was Nietzsche, he was some like fanatical monk who was obsessed with self-flagellation or something. Maybe that what you were. But it's like this thing of like Steiner gives stories as well, I realized, but they're not historical like Manly's. They're his schizo posts. And it's like, what do you take? Like, I guess with Manly, it's useful in a sense because they're grounded, but then there's the schizo post.
Yeah. All right. So if we're going on the more, occultism and stuff, and possibly we're going to side with someone who's bringing more parapsychology and whatnot to the table, then probably, Steiner takes the win. Manly's more of an intellectual character.
It's hard because Steiner does completely, like, he'll say some things that are fascinating, but then again, I always remember the Buddha goes to Mars, where he's like, Buddha went to Mars. And I'm like, no, that's just, he goes completely off the rails at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, who knows what is really going on in his mind there. And people who dabble, like go far down the road of lucid dreaming, this is kind of the territory that they end up getting in, because in a lucid dream, could you find yourself on Mars with like a Buddha hovering around? Definitely. You definitely could. But does that mean it actually happened? Probably not. Right. This is like Robert Monroe, who, wrote the Journeys Out of the Body and whatnot. It's hard at some points, especially with his far journeys, to know, what's really going on. Is he dreaming? Is he astral traveling? What's really going on here? But if we were to defer more so to the parapsychology, the kind of mystical abilities and things like this, it's probably Steiner. As an educator, I would vote Manly.
Okay, that's interesting. Because, like, I think it definitely, Steiner as an initiate, definitely. But then there's the schizo posting. And as you said, like, Manly does have all the good little tidbits.
Yes.
And so, because I'm divided there in that sense. Like, it would have been Steiner if he didn't full schizo post all the time. But he goes off the rails a little bit. And because Manly is just more grounded, I will kind of, I'm on the fence, but because of you, I'll tip it over and I'll give it to Manly.
Yes, Manly for the win.
Okay. So now coming on to the other side. Giordano Bruno versus Iamblichus.
Ooh.
This is interesting because all of the passionate stuff you said about Giordano Bruno and his influence, is that enough to overtake, like, someone who I would describe as the most maligned Neoplatonist? Like, when you look at the Platonists and the middle and the late Platonists, the one that always gets maligned is Iamblichus. He's too esoteric for scholars, and they just like, this is not rational enough for me.
Yeah, and since I have no authorities to be, over my shoulder, it's the reason why there's this animosity against the Iamblichus is because the people trying to look into Neoplatonism and whatnot, they don't have any experiences to go off of, or those kind of things are limited, or they're just not open-minded enough to accept that people can experience things like this. Whereas if you're approaching the Iamblichus from that experiential point of view, and even from that point of view of like, I've had crazy experiences that I need help understanding them, Iamblichus can still, from the echoes of ancient history, come around to like offer you something. And you're like, oh, that's what's going on, right? And he does this at a bunch of different levels. And so, you know, it is very clear that Iamblichus was not only having experiences himself and investigating them, trying to figure out the mechanics of them, and then leave that behind for his students, put that into his writing, but also his own students and the people around him and the sources he had access to. You know, he was digging into the mechanics of all of these different layers of experience, and showing you what's possible, and kind of saying, like, kind of calling balls and strikes there, right? I mean, in the letter to Anibo that Porphyry writes, and he famously replies to in the guise of the Egyptian priest, he kind of slaps Porphyry around a little bit. And, you know, you wonder if he's doing that in order to create like the weight of this Egyptian priest, and to let it hit home a little bit more. And Porphyry's just kind of acting out the part or whatever. But it communicates so well, especially if you're trying to figure out what's really going on with these experiences. How do the gods and the daimons, how do these other beings actually manifest in reality? How do they appear? And if something does appear, how can we tell the difference whether or not it's a daimon, it's an angel, it's something greater? Because when you get this kind of whitewashed, sort of more cornbread Christianity and these kind of underread systems, it's like, you know, whatever appears, it's an angel, it's God, or it's Jesus coming back. It's these sort of, it's like a, you know, it's only a couple things it can possibly be. Whereas Iamblichus is offering like a more in-depth understanding of these different phenomena. So he's like an early phenomenologist, and he's speaking with this kind of authority that and descriptions where you're like, okay, he's onto something, and he knows what he's talking about from experience. So in that regard, I'm going to side with Iamblichus, because as Bruno makes a very fascinating and poignant and gripping historical study, and, you know, the manner of his death, his writing was his great writing and whatnot. But I have to give it to Iamblichus just from those experiential grounds, and he's considered, like, by Hanegraaff to be someone who is in the Hermetic tradition of his time. Right. So I think that's very important. I mean, he's mentioning Hermes quite often in his On the Mysteries. Yeah, I gotta give it to Iamblichus on that.
Gotta give it to Iamblichus. Yeah, I gotta concur, because in what breaks it for me is, you know, Giordano Bruno, he has lots of beautiful things to say, but in the end, there's the stories. Iamblichus, I believe it was Iamblichus, where he like evokes the daimon of the springs. And like evokes the diamond up and shows his student, like, this is what one looks like, kind of thing. Like, you don't get necessarily, there are some esoteric stories with Giordano Bruno, but as pure occultism, I guess Iamblichus has got to win.
Yeah, and you know, I would have to double check this, but on instinct, I also want to say that Iamblichus kind of understood that there was other beings in the universe as well, kind of that same Bruno, you know. So, you know, there's something to be said about that also. And, you know, he's an early stream that influenced a lot of these later characters. And if you're name dropping Iamblichus in the time of Bruno, like, you're deep in the esoteric studies at that point.
Okay, Hermes Trismegistus versus Jesus Christ.
Oh my gosh, it came to this.
For me, I'll say, what can I live in a world without? I could so I mean, yeah, it's influenced the world, Christianity, but in a sense, Christianity, with its Mithraic symbolism, its Egyptian theology, its Neoplatonic backbone, I don't know. I would prefer to live in a world without Christianity more than a world without Hermeticism. So that's a big call.
Yeah. Well, it's you always wonder, you know, what would have happened if Christianity did not become the dominant religion. I don't think it would just be, oh, you know, no religion would exist in the West. No. Obviously not. Obviously not. There would be some
at the very least, it would have been Mithraism. or something.
There
Some
would have been
combination.
something. I mean, Emperor Julian tried his best. Like, for instance, and I don't think he would have been successful or whatever, but I would have loved to see the guy have his chance. He just died, only 16 months of ruling, but he was trying to bring Iamblichus's writings and make these Neoplatonic writings, the most esoteric of the Neoplatonic writings, like commonplace in the religious milieu, right? That's interesting. Where could that have gone? What would have happened if that took over? Because like the dogmatists, in some senses, ruined a lot of the messages in Christianity. The dogmatists got a hold, and then it kind of became, where still to this day, a lot of even championed apologists and evangelicals still are telling people, like, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as, like, even up to your deathbed, if you just say, I believe in Jesus and I have my faith in Jesus, like, you're going to be saved. That is a fear-based approach, a fear-based approach. And how many times does the Bible say, do not fear? Like a lot of times, right? So there's a lot of that fear there. And I would say Hermes, the archetype included, has this going for it, is there are, though those scholars, for whatever reason, some scholars like don't see this, they put the blinders on. Hermes, throughout the Corpus Hermeticum, there are these practices, there are these exact things that you have to do. So it's like, how does it happen in Hermeticism? Well, you have to overcome the avenging daimons first, right? So that there's this clear purification that needs to happen for every individual. And that brings it right back to you. That's saying you need to do exactly this to get to this place. And then you can do this to get to that place. It's scattered through there. And there was probably way much more of it that we just don't have the physical manuscripts for right at the moment. So I like that. Whereas in a lot of senses, in the New Testament writings, what we have from Jesus is surrounded by sometimes these mysterious parables that aren't always clear. And they're kind of, a lot of people say, well, you can't just reduce Jesus to a moralist. And like, I get what you're saying, but he is giving people a lot of moral instructions. You also can't say that Jesus isn't a moralist as well. But as far as like, as far as training the initiate and satisfying someone who's really seeking the spiritual knowing, the Hermetic writings, I think, were geared more towards that. Whereas the Christian writings are kind of like communicated to a people in suffering, that they need something to hold on to, something more general. And it's sort of like, okay, I have a way for you. Do this, practice like this, right? Turn the other cheek. There are these exact things, but they kind of stop there. They don't breach that threshold into what a mystic or an initiate might really want to get at in order to advance further, because you're always going to have individuals where a moral code isn't enough. We can be good people and everything else, but we want to have these experiences. If we do live in a spiritual reality, etc., if the angels exist and whatnot, why can't we communicate with them, right? So I would give it to Hermes on that ground, making a lot of Christians mad at the moment, but I gotta give it to my guy Hermes.
Well, it's not about if Christ is God, it's about if Christ is the best occultist. So sorry, yes. Hermes wins.
Let's go. All right.
Tier ranks. All righty. Okay, so now it's the semifinals. Sorry. Yes. So Gurdjieff versus Manly P. Hall.
Ooh.
So
I think you know where I'm already at on this one.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It's hard because as you say, like, for a new person coming in, mainly Manly P. Hall may be better in a sense, like his secret teachings of all ages as like a source text. You start to read it, and then he'll mention something and you can go off and read that, and you can go off and read that. With Gurdjieff, that doesn't really happen. It's enclosed. But with Gurdjieff, as I said, it's not just Gurdjieff. There's an order. There are fourth way groups And so in fourth way groups, you also get other authors. You have Ouspensky, you have all of these other things. Even if you struggle to read Gurdjieff, you can then you then know, like, oh, okay, he had students, I can go and read them. There's more of a support structure and whatnot. So as occultism goes, I gotta I'm going with Gurdjieff. I'm going with Gurdjieff Burgee. You got anything to counter, or
No, I think I've I've laid it out for my argument for Manly P. Hall. And he just his effect on modern Freemasonry. It's like without a world without Manly P. Hall, that would be that would be a different looking world, especially for Freemasonry. And just like you're more your esotericists or people that are more open-minded, they're not reading all of these sources that are on this list, but they might read Manly P. Hall and that might stick with them. And there was something that he could reach the more common man with this stuff. But we can certainly do Gurdjieff. I know he's your guy, but I think his journey will end in the finals if we do.
Indeed. That is quite possible. But yeah, I think Gurdjieff, because even though Manly P. Hall is more generalist and more influential in that sense, I think for a development, in the development sense, kind of going with Gurdjieff as an occultist, as a system that can develop the individual. And it's not like, once again, once you start branching out, like Ouspensky trained Maurice Nicole, who was supposedly Jung's, Jung was supposed to teach someone to take on after him. And that was Maurice Nicole. And Maurice Nicole attended like an Ouspensky lecture and was like, nah, I'm going to do this. And just ditched Jung. So you have all of these interesting things, and Rodney Collin and J.G. Bennett, and all of these weird people were influenced by Gurdjieff, like people who are into like, rock, like King Crimson. The guitarist Robert Fripp of the band King Crimson was a hardcore Gurdjieffian. There are some like interviews with Robert Fripp where he like starts talking about Gurdjieff and the like cosmology and all of that, and it's interesting. It's interesting. There's as an initiate, even though he may lose an influence as an initiate and as a system builder, I think I kind of got to bring Gurdjieff in. I'm biased.
I know. Yeah, you wanted him there. You wanted him there all along.
I mean, maybe he would have lost. It would have been interesting to see against Steiner.
See, but Blavatsky, like, it was hard for him to lose to Blavatsky in the beginning, but he had to break out of that to get where he is.
I think, yeah, that was a tough one. But in a sense, like, I don't know if I could forgive myself if, like, I go with Blavatsky over Gurdjieff.
You just had to put them together in the first bracket.
But then we come over to the other side. Iamblichus versus Hermes Trismegistus. Because here we have an archetype. Hermes Trismegistus, something more vague.
Yeah.
Versus the man. Versus the guy.
Yes, and Iamblichus himself is explaining to us the more archetypal aspect of Hermes and what that meant apparently.
Exactly. Because like without Hermes, there's arguably no Iamblichus, but Iamblichus refines and explains Hermes to us.
So I mean, Iamblichus would have said, "You're comparing me to Hermes Trismegistus? Are you crazy? Of course it's Hermes Trismegistus, right?"
What?
Yeah, I mean, all his Iamblichus is on the mysteries. It really it is one of my top 5. Like I always want that. If my house burned down and a couple books survived, please let it be on the mysteries, right? Please let that be one of the books. But if it came down, the Corpus Hermeticum, all the Hermetica, and all of the writings of Iamblichus, the Corpus Hermeticum, baby, survived the fire, survived the house fire, right? And that kind of leads to my obvious choice here is with Hermes. And this is the danger of putting that more archetypal God, possibly God-man on here, because they're so supercharged. But the thing, man, I mean, Hermes he's sneaking around everywhere under many different guises. Under many, you
Yeah.
don't know, you never know who he is or what he is or where he is or how he is. You don't know. And that's why he's still here today. That's why you can go into DC and you see the symbols everywhere, you know, alchemy, medicine, like pick your arts and sciences. Hermes is sneaking in there as well at the foundation of it, you know? So, I mean, Iamblichus himself would vote Hermes. So I think it's
So you go on Hermes Trismegistus?
Yes.
Okay, we'll bring Hermes Trismegistus in. And
I think it's like our most two biased figures are now in the finals. Yes.
Yeah. So for the grand finale now, this is interesting. So I've been biased up until now, but I gotta say, because with Gurdjieff, in his book Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, he mentions this character called Ashiata Shayamash that came to Earth and helped out everyone and redeemed, and actually was the greatest initiate after Atlantis, and no one has been comparable since him. And it's not Jesus, because he mentions Jesus in Beelzebub's Tales, so it can't be him. It can't be symbolic of him. And when I read Ashiata Shayamash, it seems that he's like a composite kind of guy that Gurdjieff has just kind of made up, but out of other people. There are some aspects of Ashiata Shayamash that are definitely Zoroaster, and some that appear to be Moses. But I see Hermes Trismegistus in there. I think Gurdjieff was, on some level, influenced by Hermes Trismegistus as well. And so it's this thing. It's like the world without Gurdjieff or the world without Hermes Trismegistus. Who's more influential? It's got to be Hermes.
Yeah.
I mean, this was the danger of putting on old guys as well, classics versus moderns.
Right. There's probably no clean way to do this unless you did like purely moderns, unless you did a hard stop at like the 1500s and forward or whatever. But you go on Hermes? Gurdjieff was an Atlantis enjoyer.
He was.
Okay.
He was definitely an Atlantis enjoyer. He claims that there was an Occultan society in Atlantis, and they had a complete system of objective science. And our science is only 1/7 of the science they had.
Did he have an immediate sort of like reference for his Atlantean interpretations, or?
His thing was, trust me, bro, there was a recovered tablet that was recovered somewhere, and then that was inscribed onto another tablet, which was lost in a jungle, but a guy saw it and then told me, trust me, bro.
Whoa. Okay. Well, because I'm wondering, because the kind of idea of there being this sort of occult brotherhood in Atlantis, you know, Blavatsky mentions stuff like that, right?
That's why I think Gurdjieff definitely, it seems, if you want to timestamp it, Gurdjieff's system, he would have been building it in around 1910, 1913.
Okay.
That's when he as a man would have done a bunch of stuff beforehand, because no one knows his exact birthday, but he's about as old as Ouspensky. They're about the same age. And so in like 1910, 1913, he would have been building like that's when he would have been putting together everything he's learned and like starting to teach his stuff.
Okay. Interesting. Now, he spoke what languages do you know that he was fluent in?
He definitely, Greek, Armenian, Russian, French. There's probably a couple more.
Because I'm wondering if the Secret Doctrine or something was translated in a language that he could have read. There could have been. You never know. But I like he's picking up on Atlantean elements that were like. You know.
I think he definitely read it because Ouspensky read it and mentioned it to Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff, he's a bit of a slanderer. And he basically says, yes, Blavatsky, it took me years to unlearn everything she taught me.
Oh, so he did dabble. So he definitely did dabble.
So I think he definitely read the Secret Doctrine and wasn't impressed.
Ah. Yeah. Yeah, I could see there being things in the Secret Doctrine that you don't want to pick up and run with. You know, it's just like, ooh, okay, you got some exposure, and then, you know, move on.
It's one of those things. He slanders things, but then he'll use it. Like he says, Aristotle, forget about those old Greek guys. But then he quotes Aristotle at some points. There's like a quote in Beelzebub's Tales, which is like lifted from Aristotle, and so. it's one of those things. It's one of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's Hermes for the win. It's Hermes for the win, folks.
So I've been biased all this time, and I feel bad if I continuously let my bias win. So, and hey, having Hermes, Trismegistus, the man, the myth, the legend, the legend, as the winner isn't a bad win. I'm happy to see him on the throne.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of figures had to be he had to be victorious over a lot of giants in the field. But since he is not a single he, he has that advantage. Without Hermes, the world would be different. We would not have another rich source, another rich tradition. And there's visualization techniques inside the corpus hermeticum that anybody can use, and if you put them to practice, things can happen. You can, other states of being will come to you, and things, even remote viewing might happen at that point. But he's like, to understand God, right? If we're thinking about God in this omnipresent, omnipotent kind of aspect, go inside of your own mind and test that out. Like, try to be underneath the grasshopper as it crawls through the thing. Try to be with the worms, be with the whales in the sea, and be with like the ray of the stars as they shine. Put your mind in all these places, and that produces an effect in the initiate. And there's a number of them, but I think the corpus hermeticum in and of itself, there's no denying its impact. There's no denying its utility. It doesn't have this Socratic approach to philosophy where we're trying to ask questions continuously about things, right, until we figure out some kind of logical understanding. It is more of this master and disciple tradition, where the disciple poses the question, the master may say, stop talking and listen. So I like that. And I do think that this legend and this figure stretches back into the Lost History episode, that there's something there with Thoth, with Atlantis, with, I don't know what it is necessarily, but it's there. And we just haven't really found it yet. Some people claim to have found it, and they claim to have given us the answers, but we want something more satisfactory, right? But Hermes, once again, is going to be sneaking around with that discovery.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I don't want to add anything more.
Well, this was fun, man. This was fun.
This was very fun. And to all the viewers, put in the comments who you think should have been on, or who do you think, actually, that's a good question. Who do you think got missed out here? Who would have you replaced?
Ooh, there's a lot of them. I mean, we could have tripled the size of this bracket.
Oh, man.
I mean, I sent you like a huge list.
Yeah.
And, so we could at some point do like a super bracket or something.
I knew this was going to be long. That's why I was like, nah.
Yeah, yeah. You made it competitive, though. You made it competitive. These were hard. These were hard decisions.
Yeah. Definitely. Oof, we made it, though. We made it. Thank you for doing this with me, by the way. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was. It's good to do something more lighthearted,
Especially in this day and age. Me with a little St. James in the background.
Well, you are the esoteric comedian par excellence in my book. Yes,
I've made a few people laugh. Apparently.
Oh,
Nonetheless.
Please. You self-deprecate.
Nonetheless, thank you. We've had we've talked about a lot of occult scholars, but I definitely think you are a modern one, a modern Manly. I think Manly P. Hall would have been proud to have you as his son.
Oh man. I'm gonna have to process that compliment. I appreciate that, man.
No, thank you for coming along, and thank you for everyone to watching. Is there anything you want to tell the viewers about your stuff you got coming up?
There would definitely be some exciting essays coming up. Just trying to keep the ball rolling. I decide on subjects through excitement, and it's sort of You know, I wait until something really speaks to me, and it feels like it's something more than just you know, I don't want to be out here just cranking out videos for views or anything like that. The idea of going through all these figures we see on screen here, it's like there's a lot to learn from these people, and it's not that you have to have this grandiose, you know, we have to digest all the facts and everything like that, but it's just you know, these figures in the past left their work behind, and not a lot of people are looking to them or are doing the reading anymore, especially right now. No one's doing the reading, but there's so much fascinating stories and materials and ideas that these people have developed. It's worth digging into at this deeper level, and not just dismissing, you know, any of them out of some weird religious dogma or bias. You know, at the end of the day, we're all humans, and we all suffer. We all got our stories, right? And it's good to go, you know, listen to Paracelsus. Like, you might not have suffered as hard as that guy, right? He might have had some great ideas that left behind, and he did, and that's why they have this effect. You know, Bruno was burned alive, and held firm to his beliefs, right? Hermes wasn't even a single individual, and still to this day he blows people's minds because of all the different angles that you know, that he or it, you know, touches on. So it's, you know, the Western esoteric tradition is very rich, and it's worth, you know, it's worth studying, because it's not going away anytime soon. And as the dogmatic religions inevitably crumble, in my opinion, as the old machines collapse, the new traditions, the new parallel systems or point of views must be constructed. And as every Renaissance does, you grab the gold from the past and you figure out how we can transmute that into something valuable for the future. And so that's, you know, that's what we're trying to do here.
Beautiful, beautiful. I couldn't have put it any better.
Thank you, brother. This was awesome.